I'll quickly go through the Vigil mechanism and the company's bill requirements. Something which a lot of us think is very, all of us say whistleblowing, so we don't go into the details of it. And I think the devil is always in the details. So I'll maybe cover a little bit of the statute, as I understand it. And I'm sure all of you have gone through the company's bill, the session is focusing on it. But there are some sections which no one talks about. So if you read the newspapers, everybody talks about CSR, everybody talks about auditors going to jail for 10 years and all that other fun stuff. But no one really talks about the Vigil mechanism. There's section 177(9), which really talks about establishing a Vigil mechanism. My interpretation of it is obviously a whistleblowing policy. I'm sure a lot of you would have known that the clause 49 recommended whistleblower policies to companies which were listed, but they was not mandatory. And my experience when I go to a lot of companies is they really don't have whistleblowing policies or exhaustive hotlines. Even if they claim they do, generally it'll be an email of an individual in the HR department or an individual who's a senior management or an individual who's a senior advisor. That's really not a Vigil mechanism. That's more like, we got to do something, we got to tell people they can complain, so here's an email, So I wouldn't call that a full mechanism in that sense. But so if you look at the statute, it says every listed company or such class or class of companies as may be prescribed shall have to have a Vigil mechanism once the company's bill obviously comes into law. My understanding is listed company and the class of companies obviously will be defined at a later date by the requisite authority. If you go to the next one, it's safeguarding against victimization. That's also extremely crucial. Because of the fact that the biggest issue around whistleblower is that how do you make sure the person who has blown the whistle is not victimized. History has shown that across the world that generally the whistleblower is the first person to be victimized. The person never gets a job anywhere in any other company because no one wants a troublemaker. Number two is within the company itself, no team wants to, so let's say the person is in finance, hypothetically, blows the whistle against the CFO, saying he's forging the financials, a lot of misreporting happening. I don't know which other department within the same company would like to have that person. You obviously, we are at least in all over the world, not just in Indian phenomena, we're all very risk averse. You don't want a troublemaker in your team. You want to kind of do business without having somebody who just loves blowing the whistle. So unfortunately, victimization is something which is across the world, not just an Indian phenomena. We obviously know instances in India where, like the Indian oil case, etc., where somebody has tried to blow the whistle and they're killed actually. You have people who've blown the whistle on highway projects, they've been killed. You have RTIs. I consider RTI kind of at a very high level whistleblowing. Those people have also at occasions been killed. So it's a very serious thing actually. All of us have not focused on it because I have not seen any major points of view in the market, at least around hotline whistleblowing, how people will manage it. And I think it is the biggest, I call it the grenade, sitting there without the pin being pulled out, and once the company's bill comes into law, I feel this is the thing which will impact all of you. Because I can tell you, I do investigation, that's all I do. And I can tell you most of the cases we get are generally whistleblowers. We rarely come across, audit will identify policy issues, process issues. So unless some senior management is really out there and can say that's a fraud, generally fraud, at least when it's defined and we actually investigate, is generally primarily whistleblowing. I've rarely come across a case in India at least, which I've done, which is through an audit or an internal audit function. Another thing about victimization is the person has to have access to the chairperson of the audit committee. So it's very important. The chairman of the audit committee now, I think, will get a lot more responsibility on him because it's his responsibility to make sure that the person who has blown the whistle is not victimized. And if the person has been victimized, he will blow the whistle publicly also in the media. So unfortunately, whether we like it or not, you have an official whistleblowing mechanism and you have an unofficial whistleblowing mechanism, which is the media. So you don't deal with it, the media will have to deal with it, and then the authorities will come and ask you, what were you doing as the chairman of the audit committee? Also, another thing which is interesting is most companies I go to, generally you have two types of companies, and I'm being very candid about that. One type of company wants to do the right thing in form and substance, which means they will get a whistleblowing policy, they will get a hotline, which is a phone number, they will get an email, they'll get 5 ways for an employee to communicate, they will go all the way and do posters, email blasts, like a marketing program. And they'll make sure every employee knows this is the way to blow the whistle, and they'll run it the right way. There's a second type of company which will come up with a whistleblowing policy. No one in the world will know about it. Only the auditor, when he asks, is there a whistleblowing policy, he'll be given the policy. There'll be one email, God knows who receives that email. When you go to the HR head or somebody who actually deals with those policies, he'll say, I've received one complaint in the last 1 year. And that was a small issue around the water machine, and we didn't really ignore it. Then suddenly the biggest Ponzi scheme is uncovered in the company, and he says, oh, I forgot about that particular email, it just slipped. So what I'm saying is that I've seen both, and I would say India is split 50-50, where I've seen a lot of companies on this side, and I've seen a lot of companies on the other side too. So it's very important that I think if you look at this, they actually say you must display it on the company's website. That's forcing companies to actually put it on their website. So you have to deal with it. You can't keep it under the carpet. Then there's the code for independent directors. I think a lot of onus has been put on the independent directors to make sure this vigil mechanism works properly. And I think that personally makes sense to me. I mean, in the sense, technically, they are the gatekeepers, and they'll be objective. So you technically know that if they ask for the whistleblowing complaints, they make sure the whistleblowing complaints has been properly dealt with. I think the companies will become healthier. It will become better for the external shareholders. Maybe they may not like it because of the amount of onerous responsibility on them. But as a forensic specialist, I can tell you at least good will happen in the company, and that's good for the external stakeholders, etc. Obviously, I'll just talk a little bit about the current scenario. So assuming the companies bill was not passed, let's say in the Rajya Sabha, if you look at four main aspects of a whistleblowing policy, you have mandatory for the private sector. Today, if you look at global practices, it is mandatory for private sector in a lot of the countries across the world. In India, as of today, without the companies bill, it's not mandatory. If you take anonymity of whistleblower, it is generally anonymity is asked for in whistleblowing across the world. In India, no. If you take strong penal provisions around victimization, there is none in India. Even if you look at the companies bill, it asks very theoretically that can you please comply with and make sure no one is victimized, but there's no real penalty which is prescribed. At least that's not my interpretation of it. Incentivization, generally across the world, like you have the Dodd-Frank Act, the False Claims Act, you can actually get money. You get reimbursed if you blow the whistle and you uncover a big scam. In India, except for maybe some excise laws or tax laws where you do get some sort of incentivization from the regulatory authority, and that's been going on for quite a few years. Some of us know it, some of us don't. There's no real formal mechanism to incentivize the whistleblower. So I think we kind of fall off the cliff when it comes to whistleblowing for the private sector. I'm not talking about the whistleblower bill. The whistleblower bill does not deal with private sector. It is predominantly dealing with government officials, CVC. So, a lot of people hear whistleblower bill, and without looking at the statute, they say, oh, we have protection, there's a whistleblower bill, but it doesn't impact your life in the private sector. Obviously, what we've seen globally is you have a lot of issues where the WorldCom case, Novartis, whether you have Enron, all of them were whistleblowers. There's very rarely, even if you look at the Madoff scam, you'll never hear of a big scam being uncovered by a non-whistleblower. Even the Olympus, where the former Olympus boss himself blew the whistle, was predominantly a whistleblower in that sense. What happens in India? Obviously, there's huge dangers in blowing the whistle. You start getting calls, you start getting victimized. People in India do have paid with their lives on the RTI side. So that is an unfortunate reality. How do we get there? If you look at the timeline, obviously in 2003 we started this whole journey down the whistleblower bill, which was called at that time the Public Interest Disclosures Bill. Even today, the whistleblower bill has been passed by the Lok Sabha, but it's pending ratification as far as I understand it. I'm not the big lawyer here. With the Rajya Sabha, same with the companies bill, it's been passed by the Lok Sabha, waiting for ratification. So let's see what happens with these statutes and if they improve the quality of whistleblowing and the policies and giving people the encouragement to blow the whistle. Just a little bit of details is if I look at the areas of a whistleblowing proper vigil mechanism. First area which is up for debate is who are to be covered. So that becomes an interesting point, because as per the bill, you're only covering employees and directors. So if you read between the lines, you're actually not covering third parties. So what I mean by third parties is it could be people as temps, or it could be people who potentially are your vendors, suppliers, customers. A lot of times, if you look at multinational companies, a lot of the whistleblowing actually happens by a third party. So let's say hypothetically, a vendor is being harassed and is being forced by a procurement head to pay a kickback. How will you know about it? Because the vendor now cannot use your internal mechanism to blow the whistle. So who does he go to?